Universal credit has been sold under the premise that it's going to simplify all the random benefits that there's been in nationwide into one simple, easy-to-use benefit. The problem with it is that it's not been thought through, it's not been funded properly, and at worst it simplifies all the problems you might have had in different areas into one simple place, i.e. you get no money.
I can offer you some courses on budgeting if it feels like you're not managing your allowance. And other than that?
Well, I'm caught whichever way. I haven't eaten in days.
It's really a problem. It's divorced people from their local authorities who have the expertise with housing and with council tax, because Universal Credit has also taken on all the housing benefit kind of stuff. And it's also coincided with a huge surge in rent arrears nationwide, which is nationally known.
I first became interested in Universal Credit because I was getting more and more feedback from partners who work in the community and voluntary sector around the impact that Universal Credit was having on the people that they were working with. And so when we started to look into it and the experiences that people were having as a result of becoming a Universal Credit claimant, it really felt like it was concerning, and people were starting to report issues with their health and well-being. So in response to that, obviously it's important that I recognise the things that have a negative impact on the people that I'm here to serve, as well as, looking at opportunities to promote health and well-being. So I felt it was really important for us to get a better understanding around that Universal Credit impact and what it actually means for the people and the experiences that they have.
When I did the research on Universal Credit, I was working as an embedded researcher at Gateshead Council on a project that they commissioned, partly because we'd been doing work in the east of Gateshead and people had talked about their concerns around Universal Credit, and it was quite newly introduced in Gateshead at the time. People had heard a lot about it, but they'd also heard maybe some negative things. So they started talking about their anxieties, which prompted Gateshead Council to commission the piece of work that we did.
I did the application on my phone, only took me hours, and I'm hardly daft. And I phoned the helpline 1,000,000 times before I got anywhere. And then I had to go to the job centre. God, I hate that place, it's horrible. You have to stand on a green circle and wait till they call for you, and there's a security guard. It's tense.
Gateshead Council recognised that we were hearing this story more and more from, the partners that we work with and from the residents themselves. But actually what we needed to do was to be able to have something that was, sort of more concrete, if you like, in terms of evidence that we could then use to try and inform, the way we provide support for people who are experiencing a universal credit claim, and thinking about the things that we might want to do differently so that we could provide better support to them, but equally so that we had some evidence that we could provide nationally, that our politicians could use if they were going to be able to talk to government around making some of the changes that we think were really important for universal credit.
Many of the people that we spoke to talked about struggling during the 5-week wait, and for half of the people that we spoke to, it was longer than 5 weeks, and for some it was as many as 12 weeks waiting for their first payment. The average wait was 7.5 weeks for the people that we spoke to for their first payment. So the 5-week wait was particularly difficult. Many people weren't offered advance payments, but for those who were, advance payments then were deducted from their payments over the course of the coming 12 months. And that left them struggling financially. People talked about not having enough money to live on, being pushed into debt, rent arrears, food and fuel insecurity. The impact on people's mental and physical health was extreme. And I think even people's family and social relationships were affected. They wanted to maintain contact with family and friends and weren't able to afford just basic trips out. I spoke to one man who talked about the pleasure of taking his grandchildren to the beach, and he wasn't able to afford the petrol to take them to the beach. So there were lots of examples of people struggling, and people also talked about the shame and the stigma of having to use food banks, sometimes for the first time in their lives. And one woman talked about having to rely on her daughter, and she felt it should be the other way round. She should be supporting her daughter, not her daughter supporting her. So there were lots of examples of people really struggling financially and unable to pay bills and for basic essentials.
So the things that people in Gateshead were telling us was that, you know, they felt completely judged through the whole process, and they felt like the process was almost set up to try and catch them out. It didn't feel supportive at all, and certainly, you know, the elements that I've now had the opportunity to explore don't look very supportive. You know, so we had examples of people desperately trying hard to get back into work, yet being penalised for the efforts that they were making. People who were sanctioned when they couldn't answer their phone, for example, because they were already on some sort of work-related training. You know, so actually it just really felt like it was completely set up against people and almost trying to get people, you know, force people off benefits rather than providing that support to enable them to, you know, be in a position where they can access some positive employment for them.
Can I help?
Yes, it's Lisa Monroe, but I usually see Jill.
I'm afraid Jill isn't in today. I'll be handling your case. The work coaches can't always stay the same. It's a very busy service.
Right. I didn't realise. Yeah, I need to speak to someone because I've been informed that my money's being sanctioned, reduced.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no credit on my phone, so I missed the text from the co-op saying that my interview had been changed. That's why I missed it. And my supervisor objects to me having my phone switched on anyway, so I need to speak to you about that too.
You do need to be available.
But that's what I'm saying. It isn't. But that isn't fair.
People sometimes struggled with all of the evidence that they needed to present with the identification process. So often it was longer than 5 weeks before they got their money. And then managing on the amount of money, on the £317 that people are were then expected to manage on, was difficult. The payment covers housing costs and living costs. So having all of that rolled into one benefit that goes to one partner is not straightforward. And people talked about their mental and physical health being very adversely affected. And for 6 of the people that we spoke to, they felt so low that they'd considered suicide. So the mental health effects were significant.
When we were approached by Suzanne and Mandy, who'd done the original research, they presented us with the report that they'd made about how universal credit was affecting people. So we used that as a starting point, and we went into the rehearsal room for a week in January 2020, and we did 2 things. So we would try out theatrical ideas in the room, and then all of the creative team, the actors, the writer, director, producer, we would go out and we would talk to people in the community. And those were people who worked for organisations like Citizens Advice, so people who are working with people who are claiming universal credit, but also the claimants themselves. And so that week was basically those 2 sides of things, making in the room and talking to people, so we could get an understanding of what life was like for claimants of universal credit.
That's when she said the money will take 5 weeks to come in. Paid in arrears, 5 weeks.
That's right, 5 weeks.
She asked me if I could borrow off someone in the meantime. I'm not asking to borrow off someone, don't worry. I've got a little bit in my bank and I just needed a stretch. I'm going to have to do my sums because when it does come in, it all comes to me. And I've got to pay the rent myself out of it, all the bills, everything. I'm going to have to do it old-fashioned. And I've got myself a little book from Wilco's, it's blue, Danny's favourite, with a cat on the front, like Badger, if he was a tabby. So, Jill's applied for an advance for me till it comes, and I can get quite a lot, you know, up front, if it's approved.
The suicide payment, some call it. Enough to get in the trouble for some.
Universal credit discriminates spectacularly and particularly against people with learning disabilities, in my view. Most of my clients have ended up on universal credit because they've been kicked off their previous benefits, where they were safe and where they were stable and where they received enough income to live on and to manage and to muddle along. But because of the new assessment process, which has farmed out to a couple of big private companies, a lot of my clients have ended up losing their major benefit, employment support allowance. This also applies to DLA, disability living allowance, and all the rest of it. It should be obvious to any assessor with any experience of learning disability whatsoever that these people should be left alone and supported to manage in the way that they are now. But that experience and that knowledge does not exist in a big way within the assessment companies.
So there are a few reasons why we wanted to make the show. Firstly, we want the audience to really think about what should a welfare system be like, and that could be a full spectrum of opinions, but we wanted to provoke people to think about that. And secondly, we wanted to show what life is actually like for someone on universal credit.
One of the interviewees that we spoke to described universal credit as insidious brutality. She said if people are hungry and don't know where their next meal's coming from, they're not going to be in a position to put themselves, their best side forward for a job. So actually that undermines the whole point of universal credit as being able to encourage people into work.
I think a welfare system should be about enabling people to have more equal opportunities in life. It's not about giving everybody exactly the same, but it's about ensuring that we prioritise resources and support to those people who need us at points in their life when they need some support and help. I think it needs to be delivered in a way that is completely non-judgmental, doesn't have sort of any requirements around it. I think it is just about generally being kind and humane with other people.
The welfare system should, at the bare minimum, keep people from poverty, and people should be allowed to eat. People should be able to afford to eat, have their heating on at home in the winter, to be able to clothe their kids, and to be able to have a decent existence. And the welfare system has always been seen as a safety net to keep people out of that extreme poverty. And that's not always the case now. It seems to me that lots and more people, more than ever, fall through the safety net.